Welcome back to another episode of the Crime Scene Insiders. I'm one of your hosts, Dion Watson, and I'm joined by my co-host Angela Davies, and we are going to take you back under the barrier tape.
Thank you for joining us for another episode. As well as myself and Dee today, we're joined by Lindsy Slamon from the University of Salford in Manchester. We've known Lindsay for a little while now and worked with her on a different project. So we're really excited to have her on the podcast and for Lindsay to also share her experiences with you, because she was a CSI for over 20 years, not just crime scene investigator, but also crime scene manager and crime scene coordinator. And then she also managed the CSI unit in Salford, which is in Manchester in the northwest of England for some of our international listeners. And now Lindsay is the lecturer and programme lead at the University of Salford in the professional policing and apprenticeship degree. So thank you so much for joining us, Lindsay. We really appreciate it.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Just to get us started, could you tell us a little bit about your career, how you started off as a CSI and how you got into the role?
Yeah, absolutely. It was always something that I was interested in, forensics, and I think as a family we've always put it down to either reading too many Nancy Drew books when I was little, showing my age, or watching Quincy or something like that. But I was always sort of fascinated with that forensic side. So I knew from quite early on, sort of during my teenage years, that was what I wanted to get into. Did a lab-based degree, which was enough to tell me I didn't want to be in a lab for the rest of my life. So
being
focused,
there,
just
completely
boring.
Understand.
So focused on kind of being at the coalface with that SOCO role as it was back then. So straight after my degree, I started applying to get into the police force. It took me 2 years. I think there was maybe 2 recruitment rounds in that time. Didn't get through the first time because I misspelt liaising. And it showed a lack of attention to detail. I've never misspelt that word again in my entire life. Haunts me.
Can you spell it for us now? No, I'm only
joking.
I'm only joking.
That was cruel, Ange.
It was. Sorry.
No. I'll let you off. Just this once. So I finished uni in 97 and then started with GMP in 2000.
Did you start off as a full crime scene investigator, or did you start off as a volume crime scene investigator?
Full SOCO. There was no volume back then. I think they were probably introduced maybe about 4 years after I started. So it was a case of, completely thrown in at the deep end. In fact, on the first day, and I remember this really distinctly, there was 4 of us started on the same day. And we all paraded at the forensic HQ, and there was a manager there called Kevin Appleton, and he was sort of introducing us and telling us where we were going to be based. And he went along the 4 of us, you're going to South Manchester and you're going to Oldham. And then he got to me and he started laughing, like, you're going to North Manchester. And I was like, what's funny about that? And it was basically because North Manchester covered not only the north of Manchester, which is really sort of population dense, a lot of crime, quite socioeconomically deprived in a lot of areas, but also Manchester city centre. So you kind of got, you kind of got both ends of the scale in relation to the crime types. And obviously really, really busy as well. But it was brilliant. I learned more, in my first 2 years, maybe, working at Collier's police station in North Manchester than somebody would have done working 5 years at, one of the outer districts, maybe.
You've got that good mix, but I imagine also a lot of kind of serious and major category crime being in the centre of Manchester.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if you guys are the same, but we sort of shadowed a colleague for a few weeks before we went up to Durham for the Harpley Hall course. If you remember that sort of 9-week initial course. And the first job I went out to with a guy in my office was a copper that had been shot at. So straight away, it was
in at the deep
this
end.
Is the level of crime that we're dealing with. Yeah, it was manic, but like I say, absolutely brilliant just to at that young age start to get that level of experience, and it really stood me in good stead. Where it was some brilliant people who'd had loads and loads of experience, such a good team, and it was mixed back then as well. I know you mentioned in one of your earlier podcasts where you guys were talking about your careers. it was police and police staff.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we had a couple of detectives in the team. My supervisor was a sergeant. They were just starting to sort of fade that out and bring in that civilian role. So it was a real mix of experience, but absolutely brilliant. It really was.
And you learn a lot from all of those people around you, don't
Yeah.
you? So you had the 9 weeks and then a couple of weeks shadowing. Was that your full training then? Was that you then out on the...
No, I had the shadowing before I went.
Oh,
then
before
I went
you
on
went?
the 9 weeks, and then it was like, right, you're on call on Friday.
Wow.
So it was straight out.
That's a bit brutal, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely straight out. Because there was only so many of you in the team, and the rota, you filled a gap on the rota.
Yes.
So you picked up, the requirement. So yeah, I can remember getting the first call out, and you're sort of shaking, aren't you? And the
nervous
pager, which is what they used to call us out, the noise of that going off in the middle of the night scares you half to death. So you're already a bundle of nerves by the time you're on the phone ringing to find out what's gone on. You're getting turned out to the middle of Newton Heath in the 2 o'clock in the morning to an assault within a week of being back from Harperley Hall.
Real baptism of fire.
Yeah,
I'm not
really
surprised.
putting those nighttime photography skills to the test.
Straight away.
Oh, yeah.
You always pray you don't really have to use them much, don't you? It's such a faff. Your first call out.
I quite liked that though, when we had the film cameras and you developed your own images, and I miss those days.
Do you?
Makes me feel really old, but I quite enjoyed that.
I think it must be much more nerve-wracking on the film though as well, not knowing what you've got
you've
until you
captured
get
it.
back
Yeah.
and thinking,
Yeah.
oh, I hope nothing was overexposed or underexposed, and you can't actually see it. That must be really nerve-wracking.
I think it's a double-edged sword, because I mean the images, the sort of scene images would go off to be processed, but all the black and white images, if you did any fingerprint photography, we would do ourselves. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword in that you're quite right. Have I captured what I needed to capture? But also I think you were probably a lot more skilled.
Yes.
Balancing your flash, painting with light, and all those techniques that we used to use to light up a street or an arson in the middle of the night.
That's the thing, isn't it? To be a crime scene investigator, you've got to be a really good photographer. And I don't know how many of our listeners realise. It's another skill on top of all the other things.
Definitely.
So do you remember the first scene that you went to on your own?
I don't think I remember the first scene. It was probably something really bog standard, like a burglary or a theft of a motor vehicle. I remember that first call out, because it was, like I say, it was in the middle of the road in Newton Heath in the middle of the night, and we had to sort of shut the road. It was quite a nasty assault. There was a chain had been used to whack someone around the head. So there was blood everywhere, and it was nighttime photography. And so I remember that really distinctly. I remember the first body I got called out to, which was a lady. It ended up actually not being criminal, but it looked, to all intents and purposes, like an absolute bloodbath when you went in.
Really?
But actually the lady had been really ill and she'd hemorrhaged, but her living conditions were really poor. She was in quite poor health, and she'd been hemorrhaging and walking it round, and there was handprints in blood and footprints in blood, and it was in the toilet and in the bath and just on the walls everywhere.
Oh, wow.
And then she'd lay down on a mattress, and the mattress was by a radiator, and she'd passed away, and she'd been there quite a while with the heating on. So it was a mess when we went in, and the smell and all that stuff. And I think that was why it came in originally, because of the smell. Of course, you get turned out at whatever o'clock at night. And because it was my first one, it was like, right, by the book, fibre tape lift every door frame before I go through it. Plates are going down. It was, so much work just to get the then crime scene manager into the scene. So yeah, that one sticks with me.
I'm not surprised.
I think.
Yeah.
It's just when the nerves, I think.
The nerves, but it's your first one, so you want to make sure you're doing it properly. But I think when you see that amount of blood as well, you're just like, okay.
Something's happened here, definitely.
Yeah.
But then that's also an eye-opener that actually, you shouldn't make those assumptions.
That's
you
it,
need
isn't
to
it?
keep that open mind, because what you think might be the right explanation quite often isn't. So you need to keep that open mind from the outset, and then go where the evidence takes you, rather than making a decision early on as to what you think's happened.
That's exactly it, isn't it? Letting the evidence lead you and keep an open mind. It's one of the things that we always say, don't we, when we're lecturing or teaching students. always keep an open mind. I remember I had something similar. It was, we called it the murder that wasn't a murder because we thought this guy had been murdered, and the police had been called and they'd looked through his letterbox and you could see him. It was just a small flat, essentially. And it was like a T-shape. So you walk down a short corridor and then the bedroom was on the left, the bathroom on the right, and then the living room just in front of you. So he was kind of across the living room floor and then his whole body was across the hall. So it was a really awkward position. He had one arm up and one arm down. So that was fun when we came to try to get him into the body bag. But there was blood everywhere. And essentially, we were told the police had been called. They'd looked in through the letterbox. He was going to be a witness for a trial soon, and there'd been a lot of arguments, and they thought it was witness intimidation, and that somebody had come to see him off. So, of course, we're treating it as a murder investigation. And the officer who initially went to the scene had gone off duty, so hadn't put his full report in. We're there for 3 days. We had a blood pattern specialist down because, again, there was blood absolutely everywhere. It looked like there'd been a serious assault, but there was also a lot of aerated blood in the bathroom as well. Yeah. Just for our listeners, we often see when it's being coughed up, don't we? And as the kind of case transpired, it turned out that paramedics had been through the bathroom window, because what we'd seen was that the keys from his front door were on the mat. So the suggestion was that somebody had gone in, assaulted him, killed him, locked the door, and then posted the keys back through. The paramedics had gone in through the bathroom window. A couple of other police officers had been in through the bathroom window. And then as the police officer who'd initially attended came back off duty 3 days later, apparently he'd used a battering ram and he'd knocked the keys out of the lock and they dropped onto a mat.
Oh, no.
Oops. And a crucial piece of information to pass on.
A crucial piece of information. And as we were looking at the blood patterns, we were like, no, this doesn't seem right, because it's all low lying. So we can't see, and we couldn't find an impact site anywhere. And it just didn't add up. So even though there was loads of blood and the initial thing was, yeah, he's been murdered. And he had a great big cut on his head as well. And the whole thing transpired is that he was actually an epileptic. He hadn't been taking his epilepsy medications for some time. And then he had coughed, blacked out, but smacked his head. Wow. And we found where he'd smacked his head. And then he was bleeding heavily. So he's gone around the apartment. And then he eventually coughed up in the bathroom, coughed up a lot, and then died where he was. And again, further as it transpired, we got more information a few days later from the woman who lived above, saying that she kept hearing a banging. And then we looked and we found a sweeping brush nearby. It fit, and he'd been hammering on the ceiling asking for help. God love him.
Oh, no, that's so sad.
It's awful, isn't it?
So, yeah, it was, that whole thing took 3 days. Gosh. Forensic pathologist, a BPA, our time there. And we just missed that key piece of information about the keys being on the mat. Wow. And like you say, we kept an open mind the whole time because the blood patterns just weren't adding up. It just didn't make sense. It was easy to see and think, oh my God, there's so much blood here. He's got a big gash to his head. This guy's been killed. But just not the case in the end at all. Yeah,
I remember going to a job with a guy who had epilepsy, and I think initially they thought his dog had attacked him. And the dog had attacked him, but it transpired that as a result of him having a fit. So he'd had this epileptic fit and quite badly injured himself. And I think it had spooked the dog. And then the dog had attacked him, and they'd had to shoot the dog to get in to give him first aid and what have you.
Oh,
so we got this scene and the dog was massive. It was some kind of staffy cross. It was huge and just solid muscle, absolutely solid muscle. But protecting his dad wouldn't let anybody in the room, so they had to take the dog out because it was so vicious. And the hardest bit of that was getting the dog in a body bag because it was just so heavy. Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. No, we've carried a few bodies over the years, haven't we? But that was hard work. Really hard.
I can imagine.
And did the man die in the end as well?
Oh yeah,
he
died.
Yeah. Oh wow.
Yeah, really. It's a sad job, but that dog. Wow.
Do you have any scenes that have stuck with you over the years? Is there any that have impacted you quite significantly for various different reasons, or?
Yeah, definitely. I think probably for different reasons. I carry a few with me.
Yeah.
Yes.
kind of touched me in some way. And whilst, and I'm sure you'll back me up on this, most of the time you try and stay remote from it emotionally, so you try not to get emotionally involved. There's a couple that I do carry with me that sort of particularly touched me. One was a baby death, and it was a sud scene in the end. There was nothing suspicious about it, but I got to the scene as crime scene manager, and we had this tripartite approach. So a paediatrician would come along, you'd have the senior investigating officer and then a crime scene manager, and we would examine the baby in the scene together. And I think the paediatrician was maybe quite new in the forensic role, and it sort of fell to me that I was picking up the baby and turning him over. And I don't know about you, but I quite often talk to dead bodies, just, right, I'm going to pick you up now, darling, and I'm just going to take your nappy off, and just treating them with respect, isn't it? And showing that kind of empathy. So I'm holding this baby and there's no injuries, and we took its nappy off, one thing and another, and then a mum and the family were downstairs and the ambulance was waiting outside, and obviously the baby needed to go to the mortuary. So we asked mum if there was anything she wanted to go with baby. Was it a particular blanket or a toy? Or so we put him in his little carry cot and put this blanket on, a little soft toy. And as I carried him out to put him in the back of the ambulance, all the officers that were there made a kind of, what do you call it, where you walk through them, like a sort of,
like when you stand either side.
Yeah.
So like a bit of a procession,
like a little walk of honour kind of for the baby. And I put it, and that, it just really moved me.
That would me.
And it wasn't a nasty scene, other in so much as there weren't any injuries. There was no crime, nothing horrendous had happened. It was a really unfortunate set of circumstances that this baby had passed away. But that just, really, really stuck with me, that one. And another one that stuck with me for, I don't know whether you kind of resonate sometimes with a particular person at a scene, or a deceased, but it was an elderly woman who lived with her grown son, and her house was just really nice and tidy, and everything had its place, and they'd lived there together a long time. I think she was in her 80s, and he had some serious mental health issues, and he'd come up behind her, he'd hit her over the head repeatedly with a hammer, and she'd fallen onto the floor, but then he'd mutilated her.
Oh, no, wow.
And then he actually tried mutilating himself as well. So you can imagine the state of the scene.
Sounds very brutal.
Yeah, very brutal. But just dealing with that body of that little old lady who was just sat, watching telly, not expecting anything. Sort of picking pieces up, and you're trying to recover, and I'm talking to her, and that one stays with me.
Sometimes the reality is, I think, the thing that gets you, aren't you, where you try and stay detached. I think that often when people are more vulnerable, so babies or the elderly or disabled people, for whatever reason, when people are more vulnerable and you see the harm that's been done to them, I think that hits it home more, doesn't it? For me personally, anyway. I don't know about you guys.
Because a lot of the time, the stuff we deal with is, criminal on criminal, isn't it? When it comes to the serious crime. I mean, obviously you've got your DVs and things as well, but a lot of the time, if it's a shooting or it's a stabbing or it's criminal on criminal, you don't resonate with it because it's so different from your lifestyle, I think.
That's it.
But when you resonate a little bit more, I mean, not that I got upset or anything, but I just still think about it. So it's funny, isn't it? And then there's others that you carry with you because they were just the most interesting scenes ever, and they were such a privilege to manage as crime scenes because they were so exciting, really, when you sort of get some of the more unusual crime scenes, I suppose.
Sometimes it's just so interesting, sometimes because something funny happened.
You
just think, oh my goodness, what's going on?
I mean, I've got one, and I don't know how much of this you can broadcast, really, but it was a job not that long before I finished, and a job came in of 3 deceased in a single flat. So immediately you think maybe there's a gas leak or it's carbon monoxide or something that, So we'd sent the fire brigade in, nothing, all good. I arrive at the scene and people are kind of chuckling a little bit. I'm like, what's funny? Now you'll see. We play into this scene, and it was a really weird flat where you kind of went in the front door and there was a lounge on the left, and then you went straight upstairs and everything else was upstairs, kitchen and bedroom and what have you. Plate the stairs, and by plate, for your listeners, I'm talking about stepping plates where you protect the floor so that you're not destroying any evidence. Go along the landing, and as we turned into the bedroom, there was 3 deceased in the bedroom. One was on the floor next to the bed in about 10 layers of clothing and a sleeping bag. And then the other 2 were on the bed and had clearly been in the throes when they both passed away. Yes.
Okay.
And were still in position.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's an interesting one to deal with.
Yeah.
I mean,
and you just kind of like, no one is going to believe this when I go back and tell them.
Make it up, can you?
No.
Couldn't make it up.
And long story short, they'd succumbed to dodgy benzodiazepines that were on the market, and they'd all taken them. The guy on the floor was homeless. He was a mate of theirs. They'd invited him in because it was December and it was cold. So he was probably oblivious, asleep in his sleeping bag and what have you. And then, they were in the throes. So we had to process the guy on the floor first. So we sort of looked after him, and once we got him in his body bag, we made some room on the floor to then move the couple one at a time onto a body sheet onto the floor. But the lady who was on top was on all fours. So we had to kind of turn her over to place her on the body sheet. I had the head end.
Set in.
It set in and it was on its way out. So we still had some stiffness, but there was a little bit of movement.
Bit of give.
Yeah. So I had the head end and my CSI had the foot end. And as we turned her sort of 180 to put her on the bed sheet, she started to wee.
Oh no.
My colleague kind of put her legs together like you would with a baby, which worked. But then we were like, well, what do we do now? Of course, every time she sort of let her legs relax off again, she started to wee again, and all this wee's going in the body sheet. And then I'm like, we need a sample for the post-mortem. So we're trying to scoop a bit out of the body sheet into a UV tube. And it was just, ridiculous.
You literally can't make it up.
No.
But at least they went happy as well.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Yes.
There's got to be worse ways to go.
But I just think that no one will believe that when I tell them. That's just crazy. It is when something funny happens that, and I know it's a morbid sense of humour, but how else do you deal with stuff like that?
Yeah, it's the side of the job that I don't think people expect some of the weird and wonderful things that you come across and say.
No.
Like, you kind of train someone for that.
No.
And you just got to deal with it there in the moment, haven't you? It's like you say, it's not something you would ever expect. I mean, I remember one time I had to put my hand down a toilet to try and find a pair of testicles because we didn't know if this guy had been assaulted or whether he'd self-harmed. And it's like, you can't go home and tell, your parents or you're better off or whatever. Really. So guess what I had to do today?
Yeah.
What were you doing in your nice warm office? Having lunch in the mate room? Well.
Whilst I was elbow deep in a toilet filled with blood and
looking for testicles.
That's lovely.
Did you find the testicles?
No. I think he must have flushed them, but then still been bleeding because the toilet was full of like bloody toilet paper and blood and what have you, as it would be. So
how did they get there in the first place? What happened to him?
He'd self-mutilated.
So he'd done it?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Did he survive?
Wow.
Yeah, I think he did.
Did he?
But we weren't sure at first, and that's why we were trying to piece together whether he'd been tortured or whether he'd self-harmed.
He'd done it himself.
Yeah. It's a bit of a theme though, isn't it? That's 2 I've talked about already where blokes have tried to mutilate themselves.
In terms of interest, though, we always say, like, sometimes, like, we'll laugh or say, oh my God, and be just amused by something, but it's just the sheer shock of the thing you deal with, though.
Yeah. There was a job, you'll know of Dale Cregan.
That name rings a bell,
Yeah, so Dale Cregan was the guy who shot Nicola Hughes and Fiona Bone, our two female police officers in GMP.
Officers, of course, yeah.
Yes.
So the job he was on the run from, I was the crime scene manager for, and that was a really, really interesting job because he used grenades, and essentially it was all to do with a feud between two families, and he'd already killed Mark Short. He fired into a pub. Dad, David Short, we think was the intended victim, but he'd gone to the toilet. Mark was killed. So then he targeted David because he knew if he didn't, then David would retaliate.
Come after him.
Yeah.
So essentially, him and another chap, Anthony Wilkinson, kind of ambushed David. I think he'd gone out to pick up some furniture or something. He was unloading, he got back to his house and he was unloading the back of his car. He had the boot open. And he'd gone in, and it appeared from what we saw that he'd kind of gone in, put his keys down, put the kettle on, put some toast in, and then gone back out to the car to get the stuff. And these two ambushed him. So it was a semi-detached house. So you've got kind of alleyway on the side, for want of a better description. They chased him all through his house, both shooting at him as they went. And then he went out the back patio doors, back down the side of the house towards the front. And they're still shooting at him, shot him in the head as he was coming back down the side of the house. He fell to the ground, and then they threw a grenade on him.
Oh.
So we had a man with various gunshot injuries who would then had a grenade explode and taken, a portion of him away. But it had also fractured the gas main into the house. So we had a massive gas leak.
Gas leak as well.
Yeah. So that scene was like, where do we start?
Because I was going to say, that sounds like a heck of a scene to manage.
Yeah.
So we evacuated the street because of the gas and because it was horrible. So we evacuated the street, put them up in a local hotel. We had to kind of clear the street forensically. So fragments of grenade and bullet casings and stuff before we could let the gas board in to dig up the road. So they had to come in with like a mini digger, dig up the pavement on the other side of the road to isolate the gas. So we still had to evacuate people because we've now cut off their gas supply anyway.
Yeah.
And then we had to send the bomb squad in because we didn't know if there's any other grenades in there that had maybe not exploded. So we sent them in suited up with instructions as to what we wanted to preserve, and you've got to make it safe, but please be careful because we don't want to lose any evidence.
Trample our evidence.
So they went through, and then obviously firearms experts, we got down, and it was a really, really interesting scene to work because the firearms expert from quite early on was able to tell us that there'd been two shooters, and the reason they worked that out was because both guns had been misfiring. So we had cartridge cases and unspent bullets
as well,
and if both guns had been misfiring and one person had a gun in each hand, it would have been really difficult at the rate that things had happened to have kind of recocked each of those guns, reloaded and still been firing at that rate. So
how
quite early on.
Yeah,
it was a really interesting scene. I mean, the longest post-mortem I think I've ever been at was about 10 hours.
Was it?
Yeah. It
was it because he was in such a bad state and
and
all the injuries?
Grenade, shrapnel in it, and so really interesting. But one thing that does stick with me from that scene, and I can never look at them in the same way again, those kind of multicolored plastic windmills that kids get on a stick that just blow and they turn round. There was one of those in a plant pot next to where he fell, and it was spattered with blood and body matter, and it was just turning round really slowly.
And I was like, creepy.
You just need sort of children singing in a minor key. So every time I see one of those now, it takes me right back there. But
it's set up a horror film.
Of a
horror, isn't it?
So. And of course you've got to consider like your staff welfare to see something like that really you would only ever expect to see on the battlefield. You certainly wouldn't expect to see something like that in civilian life. So there's a lot of considerations around supporting the staff and well-being, and whether they were okay with what they'd seen and what they dealt with, and even TAU that were for the next 3 days were up in gutters and on the roof and wherever, sort of collecting the bits of evidence. So that was a really interesting scene. So that was the job that he was on the run from. when he shot Nicola and Fiona, which obviously was horrendous. And
That was
I
awful.
remember the job coming in because I was in the forensic tasking unit, so we monitored the queues at that point for all the demand that was coming in. I can remember that job coming in, and yeah, even now I still get goosebumps when I think about that job. Didn't work on it because I'd worked on the linked
On the previous
scene.
one, yes.
Yeah.
For our listeners who maybe don't know about the case there, could you tell them what happened with the two police officers?
Yeah, so Dale Cregan and Anthony Wilkinson, who were the two shooters that shot David Short, immediately after that job, they targeted another house that they threw a grenade at, and then they tried to destroy the hire vehicle that they'd used by detonating a grenade in that as well. And then they went on the run. I think Anthony Wilkinson was arrested quite soon after, but Dale Cregan was off on his toes. There was a lot of work done around his family and, intelligence trying to find out whether people were hiding him or knew of his whereabouts. And it was about a month later that he forced his way into the house of a barber I think he'd cut his hair sometime in the past, and he forced his way in on the premise of, I need you to cut my hair.
Yeah.
But obviously threatened them with violence and what have you. Stayed the night, and then the following day he called in a burglary at that address. So the two officers went down expecting a burglary, and he ambushed them, shot them both, and threw a grenade. So yeah, really, really unpleasant. And then handed himself in. Yeah.
That's brutal, isn't it?
Yeah, really brutal, really brutal.
Really awful.
In my whole career, there's never been a job like that that's touched the entire force.
I was going to say, I'm getting goosebumps now as
you're
talking about it. It's
that in anything like that way. It was
that thing, isn't it, when it turns and it's your colleagues that are being harmed? Because it's one thing when you're working and doing this role and it's strangers, but then actually when you then still having to deal with it and be professional, but actually it's your colleagues and people who you've worked with. And it also brings home, I think, that you're not always that safe in these roles, in this frontline response roles. Like, it can happen to anyone, really.
And I didn't know those girls, but it was their colleagues that were turning out to that scene.
Yeah.
He knew them really well. The CSIs that were examining the scene that had worked with them on district, and I can't even begin to imagine. And I've met both their fathers since. They've got some links with the uni here as well, and what amazing guys after everything they've been
through.
Awful, absolutely awful.
Really is. I can't imagine kind of working in the force. I don't know if you've heard on one of our previous podcasts, we talked about it, where PC David Rathband was shot from the Ralmort investigation, and he later died by suicide, and it was really upsetting. But I remember a couple of the scene investigators had to attend, because we at that point attended suicides, and it just kind of rippled through the force. It does have a significant impact, so I can't imagine what that must have felt like. Did you get a lot of gun crime in Manchester then?
Yes.
Yes, do you?
Yeah. Funnily enough, I was only reading recently that one of the firearms used in that job to shoot David Short was recovered last year.
Oh, really?
And it matched to the job, forensically. I think it was a warrant that was carried out in a stash house, and one of the weapons matched back to that murder. But it's probably declined a little bit over the last few years, but certainly in the sort of 2000s, 2010s, loads and loads of gun crime.
It's interesting because we didn't have much gun crime up in Northumbria, did we?
No.
So we're fortunate.
Really.
It's more knife crime, which I think knife crime is a problem nationally. Nationally, isn't it? But I think the bigger cities like Manchester, London, Birmingham, you hear a lot more of gun crime. And I always think it'd be interesting to work on.
Yeah, I mean, you become quite adept at certain things, when you obviously having to deal with firearms and how you preserve those scenes, how you recover specific types of evidence. And the number of talks that we gave to officers around how big the cordons need to be and how far cartridge cases can fly and all the sort of considerations around scenes linked to firearms discharges, because it's massive.
It is. They can travel further than you think or you would even imagine, wouldn't they?
Gunshot residue, it's so easy to lose it.
Yes.
Or compromise it. So we used to do a lot of inputs for the police officers and SIOs as well on gun crime and how to investigate it effectively. We did actually have a 3D printed firearm as well. That was quite an interesting job. It was biker gangs that were feuding, and we found what we thought were 3D printed firearm parts in one address, and then found a 3D printer in the chapter house. So there was a lot of work done around the kind of digital access to the blueprint, if you like, for the firearm, and where they've been downloaded from, how they've got them, whether they worked, whether they were actually viable as a firearm. And so that was really interesting. That whole investigation was still ongoing when I left, actually, because there was quite a lot of incidents, tat for tat stuff linked to that.
Well, because quite a lot of weapons are being 3D printed these days. It's actually advanced quite significantly, hasn't it, in recent years? And it's quite scary, I think, the things that can be created by these 3D printers.
Yeah, it's quite frightening when you look at some of them. They're not just one-shot pistols, which they were when we first started coming across them. Some of them now are, really effective. It's quite scary. Way beyond my capacity.
Yes. Yeah. We've touched a little bit, I guess, on coping mechanisms. We talked about having like a dark sense of humour. Of course, you were CSI for 11 years and then moved over into management. What kind of coping mechanisms did you have to deal with this stuff? And then were the things you put in place to take care of your staff? Because mental health hasn't, or taking care of mental health hasn't always been the best in policing, has it?
No, and I think it's still very hit and miss, to be honest. And I think it's a skill as well that we're not always the best at. So, I know I always ask my staff, were they okay? Like the David Short job, that's not something that you would normally expect to have to see as a civilian.
Yeah.
Do you need any help? But that, I reflect back now and think that probably wasn't enough just to ask people, were they okay? Because it might have been 2 weeks down the line or a month down the line when it suddenly started flashing back, or you just don't know, do you? But after the Manchester Arena bombing, there was a really big focus on trim, which obviously they use in the military, and that real sort of push around well-being and giving people access to trim and counselling. But I don't know, I think it's a role that really you should maybe have some kind of assessment annually or something, because you don't know what's going on in people's personal lives. You don't know what might trigger them, And as a crime scene manager, you're not always working with your own team. You're working with whichever staff are on at the time. So it could be someone you don't really know from Adam in a force as big as Greater Manchester. You may only have ever spoken to that CSI on the phone, and you don't know what their family circumstances are, or what they've been to the week before, or, so... Yeah, it's difficult, I think, but we do need to get better at it, for sure.
I agree. We often say, don't we, that you don't know what it is that's going to tip somebody over the edge, what's going to impact. And that we've talked about a couple of times, haven't we, Dee, how we believe that like from our own experience, if you've got something going on in your life at the time, it might not necessarily be the job itself, but if it resonates for whatever reason, or you've got a lot of stress going on in your own personal life at the time, something that would normally you wouldn't think about can just maybe send you over.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But, I think it's definitely a role where everyone's there for everybody, because those are the people that you can talk about the stuff with. You can't go home and start talking to your partner about what you've seen that day, but you can come back to the office and just, oh you won't believe what I've just had to deal with, or what I've just had to have my hands on, or what I've just had to bag up or whatever. So in that way, I think the camaraderie is pretty good.
Yeah, and it's needed, isn't it?
Yeah, that offloading, definitely needed. But officially, I think it probably needs to be better.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think there's more work being done around it now, but I think it still does need to improve, because often CSIs are not actually included in some of the reporting.
No.
Often not classed as front line, which
Yeah.
always boggles my mind.
Yeah.
Me too.
It drives me mental when from governmental level it's like, oh, you're not front line, or you're not dealing with the public. It's like we deal with them on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And
We're kind of in that liminal space though, aren't we, between, because we're civilians, which people think, oh, back office staff.
Yes.
But we're frontline because we're dealing with the distressing incidents and the horror and the hands-on all the time.
Yeah.
And you see these figures about, a normal member of the public will deal with a devastating incident 3 or 4 times in their life, whereas a police officer will deal with it 300 times. And I often think, and what about the CSIs?
More about CSIs,
that
yeah.
week in, week out are handling dead bodies, children, going to postmortems. It's just, and seeing the worst of humanity,
Yeah.
It really is, isn't it? As well, it really is the worst of humanity.
Really is. Yeah.
Can I ask what made you leave the role?
You can.
You don't have to share if you don't.
It was a combination of things, really. I went for the unit manager position.
Yeah.
Because there's not much development for civilian staff, I don't think, within the police force. There's obviously you've got the rank structure as officers, and they move from unit to unit and gain all these different skills. But within forensic services, there was certainly for me, when I started, it was full CSI, senior CSI, and then unit manager. So I went for one of the unit manager's positions, came second, knew at that point that there wasn't going to be anything else coming up probably for years, coupled with the level of ISO accreditation that we came under, which I just hated. My role as a crime scene manager, to sit at a desk signing a form to say that my staff could fill in a form to say that the freezer was the right temperature. You haven't trained me to this level of skill to have to do. I just found it really frustrating. And don't get me wrong, I think there is absolutely a place for accreditation, so that we're all doing things, in parity, and meeting a certain standard. But that level of administrative stuff was just not for me. So this role came up. The introduction of the police constable degree apprenticeship meant that police officers were now spending a lot of their time at the university. GMP at that time was solely with the University of Salford for their degree apprenticeship route. And the numbers that were going into that route were steadily increasing. We had the uplift coming from Boris Johnson, which meant that it would only even, increase even more. There was a real opportunity there. So I went for it, got it, never looked back. Love it. Apart from when a job breaks and then I go, oh, I want to be doing that.
I was going to say, how have you found the move into academia, and do you enjoy it?
And it's very, very different. It was a real culture shock at first, from 22 years working shifts, working weekends, accounting for your time, because you check, you clock on and clock off and what have you.
Clock in and out of scenes sometimes.
Exactly, to this really laid back environment where I don't need to be on campus. So if I don't need to be, I don't have to be. You are not kind of micromanaged in any way, shape or form, as long as you're doing what needs to be done. Obviously, there's no shifts, no weekends. There's a massive enforced Christmas break where I get like 10 days off.
Must I take that time off?
It's really hard life. I was paid more, no staff. So and now
like a dream, actually.
In the first 12 months, they paid for me to do a postgraduate certificate. So I had that kind of personal development as well. And in September, I am starting a master's. So
fantastic. What's your master's in?
It's in criminological people and processes. So
that sounds interesting.
So very much looking at how the criminal justice system affects people, what the impact is on people, whether it does work or not, as the case may be, and then hopefully that'll lead to me doing some research. So
Well, I've just had an awful experience with the criminal justice system. So if you want any input into your research, I'd be really happy to help.
We can discuss that outside of here, no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's going to be another podcast as well at some point. So you'll get to hear the whole thing. But yeah, happy
I mean,
to
if
help
any
with
of
your
us had a
research.
pleasant interaction with the criminal justice system, you'll have been at court with the same as me, where you're there day after day after day, just waiting, wasting time, getting stood down, getting your evidence agreed.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? I don't
yeah.
think that personally, I don't think it's working as it is, but
No. It's certainly a huge waste of money.
Yes, I agree.
In its current form.
Going back to 2010, I did my master's. Now, I did it in mass fatality management and victim identification.
Yes.
But my dissertation actually ended up being on the cost effectiveness and utilisation of forensic services in the police from crime scene to court, and whether we were actually getting value for money and what the criminal justice outcome was. And it was a poor read. It's not cost effective.
I mean, it was a good read.
It was a good read, but yeah, it's probably not what you want to read, but yeah. And that was going back in 2010, and I think things have got much worse since.
Yeah.
And I think that the ISO standards, like you say, have had a big impact. We've talked about it, and both of us saying that feeling, like you say, when you see something break and you think, oh, I'd love to get there, or I wish I could go. But we've both said, haven't we? We don't think we could go back in under the current regime.
Yeah, it's completely different now. It's changed the job so much, I think.
Yeah.
It's taken a lot of the fun out of it.
Yeah, definitely. But it always blows my brains, because I think, okay, our first responders, they're first at the scene. They're not trained. They're not accredited. They don't have to go through any accreditation, yet they're the one that caused the most of the contamination.
Yeah.
Your crime scene investigators are trained, experienced, experts in the field and highly know skilled. What to do, not to contaminate a crime scene. And yet they're the ones where you're spending all the money on accreditation, and it costs an absolute arm and a leg. And to the point where it says you must use this brush with this powder. Like, come on, where's the freedom in that? People develop their own techniques and knacks and skills, don't they?
Exactly.
Yeah. And it depends on the weather and the atmosphere and the surface and the
all of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Totally with you.
I think we could do a complete episode just on ISO standards alone.
Do a whole podcast.
Well, some of it I do agree with. I can remember when I first started going to a burglary in Manchester City Centre, and there was a fingerprint that was, I think it was maybe on the outside of a window on about the 10th floor, but there was scaffolding outside, and I just shimmied out onto the scaffolding as you do.
As you do.
Took the fingerprint kit with me and one arm around the scaffolding pole and get my fingerprint.
Any way to get that evidence.
You'd never do that now,
No.
You wouldn't be allowed. You definitely wouldn't be allowed.
No. And I probably shouldn't have done it then. You look back, don't you? But you're so determined to get the evidence at the time.
That's it.
Yes.
And you
I remember a similar story from you two, up a fire escape or something. You were hanging.
Oh yeah,
that was you.
Me with the hanging. Yeah, the hanging I went to. Yeah, you wouldn't be allowed to do that now either.
No, absolutely not.
But that's a lot of the fun of the job, though, I think. All those strange situations you find yourself in, that is part of it.
It's a challenge, isn't it?
It is. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Certainly, because I joined at such a young age, a lot of that is so new to you that, you probably don't consider the negative consequences of climbing up on scaffolding, or you're just so determined to do a good job and do the right thing. But it's certainly a job that opens up all sorts of weird and wonderful. As I can remember going in a brothel. I was 23 and I've not been in the job long, and I'm going into a brothel and seeing all these outfits and toys, and like my mind is blown. I've been sweet and innocent up until that point, and then you find yourself in the middle of Openshaw on this warrant at 6 o'clock in the morning. But just it opens up your eyes for sure. Absolutely,
it really does. Have you ever had any moments that have tested your ethics or pushed your limits?
Oh, it's an interesting question. I don't think so. Ethically, no. Testing the limits, probably just with endurance and, like jobs where you end up doing a 22-hour shift and it's, I did a brilliant job in Bolton in about 2016. And we had a no body murder where a guy, he'd been missing for about 4 days before he was reported missing, I think, was a drug user, but always checked in with his family and, drew his benefits, but he hadn't checked in and his cards hadn't been used. And so it was all really suspicious. So he was reported missing. And then some intelligence came in that he'd come to harm from a drug dealer or something. So I think they did a few house searches and whatnot, and no idea what had happened to this bloke. But there was some suggestion he'd been assaulted in this basement flat. So I was asked to go and kind of assess the flat and just see if I thought there'd been an assault. And the cops had already been in and said it doesn't look like it's been an assault. But when you started really looking with an oblique light source, you started seeing bits of blood and, so it definitely became a flat of interest. And then this job just spiraled. And I did my longest ever shift on that job because intelligence was coming in all the time, and then we got a guy in custody, and then he gave a version of events, and it was like, I can't go home. There's constantly, stuff coming in.
New information.
It was an incredible job because Darren McMinn, who was the deceased, he'd been in this flat with the offender. It was called Candido Pereira, and they'd had some kind of disagreement. There was a few stories around Candido had asked him to test a batch of heroin, or there'd been some falling out over a debt, and I'm not sure we even ever really got to the bottom of that. But ultimately, there'd been an assault in this flat. But Candido had cleaned the place up. So ostensibly, it looked like there hadn't really been an assault. And like I say, when we started looking, we found a few bits of blood, but nothing massive, just enough to sort of raise my hackles and my spidey senses start to go off.
Yeah.
So we did Blue Star. So initially, as you do, we did, the bath plug, the sink plug, the mop. Again, got little bits, but nothing major. And then I can remember being stood in this lounge and just thinking, something is not right here. Right. And when people, not to cast aspersions, but you kind of get used to people that maybe live a certain way, or maybe they're not the most house proud of people.
Yeah.
And I just looked around and I was like, the carpet's really clean. I think this carpet needs to come off.
Yeah.
And it was like, because it was a bed sit, it kind of joined the lino halfway across the room.
Okay.
So
right.
We just pulled a little bit back and it was lino underneath, and there was this big dark stain on the lino. So immediately it was like, oh my God, this is it. KM tested it and it was negative for blood. So, oh, okay. So I was convinced that was blood staining.
Yeah.
KM tested nothing. So we decided to Blue Star and it lit up. So we peeled more, had to move furniture, and so we're logging where all the furniture is, and of course you're doing all your plans so that you can reconstruct it if you need to and what have you. Roll this carpet back, and lo and behold, I kid you not, there was like a body-shaped cutout in the lino.
Really?
Yes.
No.
That had been like patched. So we Blue Starred the lino, the underlay, sorry, not the lino, the underlay. And it lit up like a Christmas tree all around this cutout. It was just brilliant.
Really?
And it turned out, I think what the dark stain was he tried to bleach the carpet to clean it up. And the bleach had kind of discoloured the underlay.
Right. That makes sense.
So he'd given up with the cleaning and cut out the blood-stained bit, got rid.
And just patched it.
And then put a new carpet on top. So the carpet was dead clean, didn't show anything, but then the underlay was absolutely covered in Blue Star when we
oh my God.
dimmed the light. Yeah, it was incredible. And then we started finding like there was little pebbles of glass that shouldn't have been there. Only one or two, but just all these things that didn't add up. And the bit of blood staining that we found was on the flex of a Henry Hoover.
Right.
Okay. So we had all that. It was like, it's definitely been an assault here. There's definitely somebody come to harm. We had footprints in blood on the underlay as well. So we were pretty happy at that point. In the meantime, they'd recovered his car, which had gone to a garage. but they'd kind of, rather than just valet it, they'd kind of jet wash the inside. So
Okay, so
it was
soaked.
still wet and sort of steaming it was all condensation on the windows inside and stuff. You're like, well, that isn't right for a start. So that came in, and we blue starred the car and got a tiny bit of blood in the boot. Sent that off, and of course the two bloods both came back as Darren McMinn are missing. So immediately we were like, right, we've killed him in the flat, he's put him in the car, he's taken him somewhere. He had a prepared statement which denied. I've never seen someone so calm and laid back in an interview, because we were watching the interview and he was laughing and joking with the detectives. He was so chilled. And then he came back with this prepared statement once these results had come back, and his demeanour completely changed. Then he was obviously full of remorse.
Yes.
So he then took us to where he'd deposited Darren, and he'd put him in a reservoir up at Horwich. So he'd wrapped him up and put, the transformers these for cannabis farms, so that sort of heavy, he'd use those to weight him, because they have a little cannabis farm in the back bedroom like you do. And
usually one somewhere, isn't there?
So he'd thrown him over the bridge into the reservoir. So of course then it's like, right, underwater unit came out, they put the little submersible in, and by this time, you've done kind of a 20-hour shift, because all this information just kept coming in. But yeah, we couldn't find him with the submersible because it was just too murky, so the divers went in and found him. And actually, the way the weights had fallen, Darren was stood in the water. And at that point in the reservoir in the summer, the water goes down quite a lot. So if we hadn't have found him,
he soon would have been head above water.
When so yeah, we recovered him from there. But that was a really interesting job. Again,
but again, that's about keeping your mind open and letting the evidence lead you, and you just. And also, like you say, the spidey senses that you get as an investigator, where something just is not quite right, so you keep going.
Yeah, and then there is an element of that, isn't there, that you sort of develop as you go along. Sometimes you just know there's something talking to you that's doesn't fit here.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that was it. And in fact, we were being followed by the BBC for that job, for a documentary series. Yeah. So I was like, I'll be on telly as long as I've got my full PPE on and my mask and my hood up.
Nobody would ever recognise you.
Yeah.
That's one thing about the full PPE, isn't it? Nobody knows who's in there.
Can hide from the press. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Have you had many problematic moments with the press?
I remember a few in the early days when I first started, because we were in our own clothes and our own cars.
Okay.
When I first started. Yeah. So you'd be at a crime scene, you'd be like, that's my car with my reg, my VRM plate. I don't really want that on a picture on the Manchester Evening News.
That's not good.
Early on, it was kind of like, could you not? But I found, as a crime scene manager, the way to manage the press was, what shot do you want early on? And we'll give you the shot. And, we'll pose going under the tape or with our clipboards or whatever. And then they tended to be pretty good, really. Yeah.
I think that if you can work with them, sometimes it's for the best, isn't it? Because otherwise they get these telephoto lenses and they intrude on so much sometimes, don't they? It's problematic.
And it's always when you've got a bag of evidence that maybe you don't want zooming in on, or you're doing something like falling off a stepping plate, or something equally inelegant.
Yeah.
In your scene suit that already makes your bum look like the size of a small country.
Yeah, they're not flattering things,
not flattering at all. And you're sweating buckets because it's the middle of summer and you've got full PPE on.
Definitely hitting on some of the really glamorous sides of the job there.
Yeah, it's just like CSI Miami, absolutely.
Isn't it just?
CSI Manchester, CSI Miami. Brilliant.
Looking back at your career as a CSI, do you think it's shaped you as a person in any way?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think, absolutely, it opens your eyes up to not only the horror that's out there and the way some people are prepared to live,
Yeah.
but also the way some people have to live,
Yeah.
you know, and their coping mechanisms and what drives them to do the things they end up doing, which, you know, when you've had a fairly, I always thought of myself as working class, but, you know, a safe upbringing, you haven't really had to go without, and it, you know, makes you very grateful. And it also
Yes.
makes you a lot more open-minded, I think, about what drives behaviour.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I carry that over now into the teaching very much, that, you know, it's very easy, certainly on, because I work on 2 programs. I work on the apprenticeship, and I also am programme lead on the undergraduate degree. And certainly on the apprenticeship, where they go out to district and then they come back to us, sometimes they can pick up a culture that makes them behave in a certain way, and we're sort of saying, hang on a minute, let's just think about those kids committing ASB that you've labelled as whatever.
Wrong-uns or
What have they been through? Yeah.
Yeah.
What kind of adverse childhood experiences have led them to that point? Maybe
Yeah.
a bit more of a trauma-informed approach would have better results than just stop searching them all the time, you know.
Yeah.
So
most definitely. And I think that some of the trouble is, I mean, I don't think probably for your students, but I think for a lot of police officers that have been in for quite some time, and I think also for CSIs that are in for a long time, you can become, if you're not mindful, quite cynical.
yeah,
It's a
Yes.
job that
Yeah.
does make you quite cynical, and because you do, I think, sometimes see the same thing over and over.
yeah,
But that's, I think, where you've got to be so careful, because that's where it becomes easy to start making the assumptions,
yeah,
and that's where you start missing stuff, isn't it? If you
Yeah.
if you go down that path.
I remember not long after I got promoted, I went on a leadership course, and they brought in the mother of a guy who'd been shot dead as he was part of an OCG, and it was an ongoing feud. But they brought her in to speak to us about what she'd been through as the mother of someone who'd, you know, committed a lot of criminality, but who ultimately was her son,
Yeah,
and she
Yeah.
lost him. And that was really impactful, because, like you
I can
say, you
imagine.
you label people and you think, you know, well, they're part of a gang, they live by the sword, they die by the sword, but it's
Yeah,
the other people that are affected, and the kids that are now growing up without parents because one's inside and the other one's deceased or whatever. It's, yeah, there's a
it
lot
is
more to it.
definitely. And I think that people are not just born into it. And well, actually, these days, I think some are born into it. I think some of it is cyclical, but like, people come into this world, and I don't think it's, oh, I know what I'm going to do when I
Yeah,
grow up. And
I agree.
often there are circumstances, aren't there, around
Yeah.
what drives people into these
Yeah.
situations and how they get there. And often that is usually around trauma, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And I've become, since I've been here, the module lead that I have taken on the apprenticeship is around community policing and neighbourhood policing. And sometimes I think, you know, how did I come from forensics to now talking about community policing? But I've learned so much whilst I've been here. And I've really enjoyed that, sort of developing my knowledge and going off in different directions, because it has informed me so much more around why people are doing what they do, and the opportunities that they've not had, and the impact that poor schooling has, and, you know, maybe going through the care system has, and all that kind of stuff. So certainly my career before has shaped me, but my career now is definitely continuing to do
Also
so.
still doing so.
Yeah, very much so. And I think I'll probably take some of that forward into the research that I'd like to do when I finish my masters.
Yeah.
I think it's good, isn't it, to come from that conscious place. If you can keep growing and be open-minded and learning as we kind of move through and progress through our careers, can only benefit, because, like I say, I think it is too easy to get stuck in a rut and become quite cynical.
Yeah.
I remember some of the guys when I first started were really cynical about rape investigation. Like, oh, here we go again. They're probably
Yeah.
drunk. And the
Yeah.
attitude around it really got my back up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can remember early on in my career, you know, like I say, being quite young, never really having been exposed to those kind of things before. You know, there would be comments around, oh, it's a prostitute, she's probably not been paid or whatever, and not even really questioning it at that point.
Yeah.
It's only as my career progressed that you start to sort of see things for what they really are and actually how women are being treated, for example,
Yes.
and starting to question it, because initially you just kind of, you're put into this culture and it is what it is. You just think you've got to learn the ways, you know.
That's it. And also you're kind of molded in the culture as well, aren't you? You've got to get on in that culture.
But there's been a lot of changes in policing since then, and even down to the language. And when I say some of the students come back having, I'm not by any means saying that all police officers have a sort of negative view of people involved in criminality, but sometimes we can be quick to judge.
Yes.
Yeah.
With that in mind, and talking about how things shaped you when you were younger and how they're still shaping you now, are there any things that you'd wish you'd known before you started as a CSI?
I probably wouldn't have got into it if I'd known.
Do you think?
No, I don't. It's very much a part of me, and I think I consider it a real privilege to have worked in that role. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm not saying every day was the best day of my life. Goodness, sometimes it's awful, sometimes it's really hard, and sometimes people annoy the hell out of you, as they do in any job. But it was a real privilege to have that role, and I would never go back and do it differently. I loved it. It's a job where you learn as you go, don't you? And and it's crime is constantly changing. So the stuff that was happening when I first started, I mean, you still get stabbings or whatever, but the motivations are different, the types of knives are different, the reasons they're happening are different, and you're developing as an individual if you're going from CSI to sort of crime scene manager and crime scene coordinator, and getting much more sort of tactical in your thinking and strategic. And so I think it's a brilliant job for learning, for developing you as a person, for excitement, interest. I think you've got to have a certain mindset. And I've often said this when I've talked to some of the students. I don't know what it is about me that enabled me to cope with those things and go home and go to sleep. I don't know. Maybe I'm just lucky. But I did have that. So I was the right person for the job, because not everyone is able to do that or would be able to do that. I could deal with those things. And I think that you're trying to help people and give people, I don't know if closure is the right word, because do you ever get closure when someone's died? But certainly in horrible circumstances, but giving people answers.
Yeah.
Which is important.
It
is.
It is rewarding, isn't it?
Yeah.
When I think as well, there's something about, isn't it, when you find that piece of evidence.
Yeah.
Like when you find that fingerprint and you get that identification to a potential suspect, the buzz you must have had when you lifted up that carpet and seen a cutout in the line, or oh my God, I could just, as she was saying it, I could kind of feel it in my own body, like the excitement, like, come on.
There's actually a clip in the episode at the BBC where I've rung the SIO and she's like, "You're joking." You can just feel it coming out of the screen that we were like, yes.
Come on. And it's that feeling, isn't it? It is rewarding.
Yeah.
I also, as you were talking about that, I'm sorry to go back to it, but I had just had a visual of, in America where they always do the chalk line around your body.
But that was another one where you were like, I put it in the book, but no one would believe that there was a body-shaped cutout in the underlay. Just so stupid.
I know it could have cut like a square out or anything, or
like actually
or get rid of the whole underlay, but just cut the body shape. I mean,
it didn't have 2 arms and 2 legs sticking out in like a star shape, but it was roughly body shaped.
Amazing.
For anyone who's listening, who's potentially thinking about the career, what would you say to anyone wanting to go into the career still, do you think?
Oh, do it. Absolutely do it. I mean, we say this to the students here that, are coming for a career in policing. They get a video that's all kind of, helicopters and riot shields and guns, and it's all very kind of dynamic and exciting. And it's, it's not all Gucci jobs.
No.
It's horror and smells and awful houses and terrible sights and, getting messy and dirty. It's long hours. It's lack of sleep. It can be really, really difficult, but It's the best job in the world.
Best job in the world.
Best job in the world.
I don't think we've spoken to anyone yet who said, "Oh God, no, don't do it."
Don't do it.
No,
Don't.
yeah,
Literally
exactly.
everybody says best
Yeah.
job in the world.
It is. I
Yeah.
mean, even, you know, I've sat there before now, sort of thinking, what's the worst thing I ever did? And, you know, you've got trying to fish out testicles from a toilet, and then you've got, and then, you know, you think of the condition of some of the bodies that you've dealt with.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting. No matter,
Yeah.
almost the worse the job, the more interesting it is. You know, I remember a
True.
domestic murder in Lee in Wigan, where he'd killed her and he'd put her in a dry pond in the back garden. But it was July and it was really hot and humid, and she'd just decomposed, and basically was sort of bones and a bit of body in basically a pool of adipocere in the bottom. And we had to
Really?
scoop it out. But we had to get an anthropologist in, and we were recovering insects and tracking the larvae to see how far they'd gone so we could establish the time of death. And it was just such an interesting job. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because in what other role do you get to deal with firearms experts and anthropologists and, you know, archaeologists and palynologists and blood pattern experts, and it's just so
That's it.
varied. It's
Yeah.
brilliant. It's brilliant.
Yeah, I'd agree. That multi-agency working is sometimes some of the best
Yeah.
bit of it as well, isn't it? I think,
Yeah.
because you're meeting some fascinating people,
yeah.
and they keep you still excited and interested in forensics, because you often find people are passionate about it, and then when they specialize, they're passionate about that specialist thing, and you learn so much from
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. I had a job in Salford where they did a warrant, and one of the guys it was a house multi-occupancy, and it turned out he was just sort of experimenting, but he had firearms, bits of firearms, boxes of ball bearings, bullet cases, explosive powders, all sorts in this room. It was like an absolute treasure trove. And he'd also taken phones apart and timers apart and power banks apart. So immediately you think like, oh my God, is this a bomb factory?
Yeah.
You know, what's going on? And I said to management, I need the equivalent of a firearms expert, but for bombs. I don't want a bomb disposal person. I want someone who can come and go through all these drawers and say, are those electrical components part of a bomb potentially? You know, could we make a viable device out of all these things? So I got a guy from the bomb data centre in London, from the Met up. And I was just like hanging on his every word for 3 days. You know, we went through this room, and it was just brilliant, because his knowledge was incredible, absolutely incredible. And I learned so much off him. But it was just like this intense 3 days of learning.
Yeah. See, those
Wow.
experiences you just wouldn't get anywhere else, would you?
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
Incredible. I've got, I think, one last question. How are you finding going from crime scene forensics to lecturing in policing?
Really good. I mean, I've got loads of stories to kind of regale them with, which is good.
Definitely.
But yeah, that postgraduate certificate that I did in the first year was around academic practice. So very much around, you know, what are the best pedagogies to use, how you can encourage different people with different styles of learning, how to assess people effectively. Not everyone wants to write an essay, how you can use different modes of assessment and draw the right skills out of people. And so that was a really steep learning curve.
Yeah.
But a brilliant one. And we've got a real mix of staff. So we've got some career-long academics who, you know, what they don't know about academia isn't worth knowing, and they're always really good to kind of bounce ideas off and what have you. They've done loads of research, they're published, and so really, really well experienced. And then we've also got police officers from different backgrounds and different ranks. So it's a really good team, because we all kind of come together and share knowledge. So we've all got our own strengths. We've got really good simulation facilities here. So they go to a burglary beamed onto the walls.
Yeah.
So they're in a burglary, and then the walls are interactive. So if they pick up a piece of evidence, it responds and what have you.
Fantastic.
We've got a custody suite that they can go in, and we could even put smells in the room. I'm not sure we want the smell of a custody suite, but
they're not the nicest place.
Smell.
No. A 360-degree assault that they kind of navigate around and find different pieces of evidence and work with them. And so it's nice to be able to use my experiences in a completely different environment.
Yeah,
Yeah, we all get along really well and put a really good package together. So yeah, it's good.
Brilliant. Well, I think it's probably a good place for us to round this episode up then. So, thank you so much for coming on this episode with us. Your career has been fascinating, so many good stories. We've really enjoyed hearing about them, and I'm sure our listeners will too. So, thank you for coming along.
It's a
And
pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
good. We're glad you've enjoyed it too. That's important. We hope our listeners have enjoyed that as well, and thank you for tuning in with us again. We will be back in a fortnight's time where we will take you back under the barrier tape.